Hello, Indian Creek 8th grade students. This is Mr. Roush, bringing you the second part of the Civil Rights Movement. We're going to be talking about the elections of the new president in 1960 and how that ties in with the civil rights. The Republican candidate was Vice President Richard M. Nixon. Nixon pledged to continue the policies of President Eisenhower. The Democratic candidate was John F. Kennedy. He promised new programs to get the country moving again. For a majority of the campaign, polls showed that Nixon was in the lead. One reason for this was that Kennedy was Roman Catholic. No Catholic had ever been president, and many Americans feared that if Kennedy won, he might show more loyalty to his church than to his country. Kennedy answered by stressing his belief in the separation of church and state. Now, John F. Kennedy, we just said, was Roman Catholic. He also fought in the Navy in World War II. He was a decorated war veteran who actually saved someone from a ship that was sinking. He came from a wealthy family. In 1946, after World War II, he gained a seat in Congress from Massachusetts. 6 years later, he became a U.S. Senator. He wrote a best-selling book called Profiles in Courage, which described different political decisions made by past United States senators. And then in 1960, he ran for president. So, with the presidential debate between Kennedy and Nixon, it was the first televised debate. And this was a big deal because Kennedy looked more handsome and youthful, and Nixon kind of looked tired and sick. He'd just had surgery, and he felt kind of weak, but he still wanted to go on with the debate. This was the first time that the American people were actually able to see the candidates, listen to them talk without actually going in person to go see them or listen to them on a radio.
Richard Nixon was the favorite to win the Republican presidential nomination in 1960. Just 14 years after he was tapped by a group of small-town businessmen to run for Congress in California, Richard Nixon stood at the top of his party. As he mapped out an ambitious 50-state campaign, he was challenged by his opponent, John F. Kennedy, to a series of televised debates, the first in American history. Even when hospitalized for 2 weeks with a knee injury, Nixon remained confident, anxious for the debates to begin, eager once again to use television to talk directly to the voters.
The Republican candidate, Vice President Richard M. Nixon, and the Democratic candidate, Senator John F. Kennedy. According to rules set by the candidates themselves, each man...
The Nixon-Kennedy debates would forever change the way Americans chose their presidents. Political rallies and old-fashioned handshaking became much less important than the image on the television screen.
You must understand that Nixon himself had said, "I don't want any makeup on for these particular debates." What I tried to explain to Dick was he has a certain characteristics of his skin where it's almost transparent. And it was a very nice thought to say, I don't want any makeup, but that he really needed it in order to have what we would call even an acceptable television picture. And of course, JFK, here he'd been riding in motorcades all over California with the top down. He looked like a bronze warrior when he came into Chicago. He really did.
I know what it means to see people who are unemployed. I know Senator Kennedy feels as deeply about these problems as I do. But our disagreement is not about the goals for America, but only about the means to reach those goals.
The first debate was costly to Nixon. The radio audience thought he had won, but the largest television audience in history had seen the vice president haggard and drawn, and had been given its first sustained look at the Kennedy style.
So it looked like a lot of the American people cared more what the candidates looked like than what they had to say. This was also the first time that Alaska and Hawaii were able to vote because they'd just become states in the United States in 1959. And this was a very close election. Kennedy won by 303 to 219 electoral votes, but had 49.9% of the popular vote versus 49.6% of the popular vote for Nixon. So John F. Kennedy was our 35th president. He offered the nation youth, energy, and hope. Kennedy spoke at his inaugural address that said, "Let the world go forth from this time and place. that the torch has been passed to a new generation of Americans. And this spoke out to the youth and to the younger voters that there's going to be some big changes in the country. Kennedy promised to face the nation's challenges with determination. In his closing remarks, he roused the American people to actions by saying, "And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." So Kennedy made plans for the New Frontier, which was a group of proposals involving social programs. Some of those programs include federal funding for education, job assistance for the poor, and equal rights for African Americans. John F. Kennedy was an advocate for the civil rights, and he wished to help African Americans in their fight for equal rights. In 1963, Kennedy tried to pass a bill that guarantees civil rights to all Americans. The bill was approved by the House, but then stalled in the Senate. While the bill got shot down in the Senate, President Kennedy left for a campaign trip to Dallas, Texas. On November 22, 1963, Kennedy and his wife were campaigning in Dallas. Shots were fired, and Kennedy was shot in the head and assassinated. The driver sped to the hospital, but Kennedy was already dead. Later on that night, Vice President Lyndon Baines Johnson became president. Kennedy was shot by Lee Harvey Oswald, which is the man in the center right there. He was arrested 2 days later. Oswald was shot and killed while being transported from one jail to another. This is a pretty famous photograph. Right here is Jack Ruby, if you can see the gun in his hand. And he basically broke through the barrier and shot Lee Harvey Oswald while he was being transported from one prison to the next. So now our new president is Lyndon Baines Johnson. He outlined a new set of programs called the Great Society. The Great Society aimed to help Americans below the poverty line, which the poverty line is the minimum income needed to survive. Another big program he had that was still around today is Head Start, which provides preschool education for all the children of the poor. And also Upward Bound is another program that he started which helps poor students attend college. Another program Johnson had was the Job Corps. The Job Corps offered training to young people who wanted to work. Another program was Volunteers in Service to America, or VISTA, which was a domestic Peace Corps of citizens working in poor neighborhoods. He also established Medicare and Medicaid, which are still used today. Medicare is they help pay medical bills for seniors, and Medicaid help poor people pay their medical bills. As you've noticed, a lot of Johnson's programs are aimed to help out the poor. In one of his speeches, he was quoted saying, "In a land of great wealth, families must not live in hopeless poverty. In a land of rich harvest, children must not go hungry. In a land of learning and scholars, young people must be taught to read and write." Johnson was a big advocate for education. He passed the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965, which increased spending in federal funds in education. He also helped cities by establishing the Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, which helped fund housing projects and rebuild cities. HUD is still a program that's used today. Lyndon Baines Johnson also believed in civil rights. He believed that the nation must protect the rights of all American citizens, just like President Kennedy said before. Congress passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibited discrimination against African Americans in employment, voting, and public accommodations. But as we know, just because there are laws against discrimination against African Americans doesn't mean every city and every town is going to abide by those laws. In the next chapter, we'll learn about the struggles that the African Americans faced in the 1960s. And that's all I have for today. Thank you very much and have a great day.